Okay, students, the course is guidance and counseling, and now we have entered in week number 7. And today we are going to take lecture number 1 of week number 7. And the title of today's lecture is Psychological Testing and Diagnosis. We will try to understand certain aspects related to it in this talk. First of all, we will introduce the concept and then talked about the psychological test. Then we will classify the psychological test and realize the significance or the need of the psychological testing, and also understand characteristics of the psychological testing. And then there are many considerations which are needed in the psychological test. We will explore all those aspects, and finally we will conclude our lecture. Let us start our discussion with introduction. Students, as you are aware that in guidance and counseling, the significance of pupil appraisal is most important. Pupil appraisal is the appraisal of overall personality of the student. Without pupil appraisal, the task of the guidance and counseling is not possible. It involves information about family background, the cultural background, the physical and psychological characteristics, mental abilities possessed by the individual, his or her aptitudes, various interests, as well as aspiration and motivation levels, etc. There are innumerable personality traits, and we need to get an objective appraisal of that. There are various measuring techniques which are used to assess the psychological characteristics of the clients. And in last week also and in this week also, we are basically emphasizing on psychological tools. And we have learned in previous lecture many other devices also, many measuring tools also. A testing program is a systematic plan for administering, scoring and interpreting measures of mental maturity, skills, achievements, knowledge, interest, personal social adjustment and special aptitude. This is basically the purpose of the testing program. It is a systematic procedure where we are administering the test, and finally we are getting the score of that through adequate scoring procedures, and there we are making the interpretations of those scores and deciding the mental maturity, skills, knowledge level and other personality characteristic features of the individual. Psychological tests commonly used, standardized, generally called the standardized test. And there are many psychological tests available with us, and I have given the example of few of them here. We have the aptitude test in order to analyze the inherent potential of aptitude related to any particular area. We have an intelligence test to analyze the intellectual ability of the student, as well as creativity of the student and the personality characteristic features or the types of the personality and his or her academic achievement or achievements on co-curricular and other activities. Let us learn more about the psychological test. Tests and inventories are tools of appraisal by which plans and decisions may be made more realistically and rationally. Because if we know the actual characteristic features of the student, then there is a possibility of making the plans accordingly. So decisions are basically made on the basis of the real appraisal of the student by applying these tests. Realistic plans are more important, rational plans are more important, and that can be developed or achieved if we are having the realistic appraisal of the students. And psychological tests are the most sophisticated and well-developed assessment techniques used in conducting research as well as in guidance and counseling. So these are widely used in the field of education and in the field of the psychology by the researchers and the experts of the field, and they are also equally useful in guidance and counseling because they give real appraisal of the students. If we classify the psychological test, then there are various parameters to classify these tests, and they are on the basis of administrative conditions. These are categorized into two broad areas. Number one, individual test. Number two, group test. If the test can be administered to an individual, that test is considered as the individual test. If the test is designed for conducting a group of students, and that test is considered as the group test. On the basis of time limit, they can be categorized into two another broad categories: power test as well as speech test. Power test means the enrichment or the in-depth knowledge related to that aspect or that construct for which you are using the psychological test. And speed test is basically related to know your ability to perform tasks with speed, or that is called the frequency. Okay, how much frequent you are in performing your responsibilities. Another basis is basically on the basis of the nature or content of the items. Items can be verbal in nature. That test will be called as verbal test, and items can be based on performances. If the items are related to the performances, that is non-verbal type of the test will be considered. So there are two categories: verbal test where language is involved, non-verbal test where language is not involved, and performance tests are there. On the basis of purpose or objective, there are certain objectives and the purpose for which psychological tests are also used. Take for example, if your objective is to analyze the intelligence test, then specifically you have to take the intelligence test. Similarly, you have to use the aptitude test, creativity test. If the objective is to evaluate the creativity of the student, if you want to know the achievements of the student, then you have to rely on the achievement test. And there are personality characteristic features. If someone is interested in knowing the personality characteristic features, then psychological tests related to the personality are also available. So there are four broader aspects which we have just discussed. On the basis of administrative condition, they are categorized as individual test and group test. On the basis of time limit, they can be categorized into power test and the space test. On the basis of the nature or content of the item or the items which are incorporated in that test, they will be considered either the verbal test or the non-verbal test, and non-verbal tests are also called the performance test. If we take the objective as a criteria, then objective is specific objective to analyze intelligence, aptitude, creativity, achievement, and personality tests. So this is very important in this aspect. Now we will try to understand the needs of psychological testing. What are the needs of the psychological testing? Now, the psychological tests are widely used in educational and psychological researches. Yes, number of researches which are being conducted in Department of Education, in Department of Psychology, and most of the researchers are using the psychological test to collect the data, that is the personality characteristic features and other aspects related to the researcher, related to the respondents or the students. Most of the researchers use these tests for any intervention programs like modification of teaching learning strategies, remedial programs, curriculum designing, and evaluation purposes in the schools. First of all, we are trying to understand the characteristic features of the student and correlating it with the academic achievement or any other dependent variable, and on the basis of this, the objective of the researcher is basically to modify the teaching strategies and to provide intervention program where some remedial programs can be prepared for them, curriculum can be designed accordingly, and evaluation can be performed based on the characteristic features of the student. Because the very basic objective of our educational program, we have to address the unique needs and the interests and abilities of the student. So in order to that, we need to analyze their abilities, capabilities, potential and inherent temperament, and on the basis of that we can design the program. These tests are also equally applicable in the guidance and counseling, because guidance and counseling heavily relies on the students' appraisal or characteristic features of the students. These tests are needed for objective assessment. There are a number of tests available in the market, but psychological tests are supposed to be the most objective in assessing the real personality, because these tests provide quantifiable and standardized matrices. They are standard tests. Objectivity is ensured when we are preparing the psychological test, and we can analyze the score in the form of the IQ. If we are trying to find out the intelligence of the student, we can categorize the student into the percentiles. We can find out the mean, median, mode, correlation and comparison other aspect. So objective assessment, for objective assessment, there is a need of the psychological testing. Another need derived from early identification of needs. Early identification. Say for example, the students are entering in an educational institution and the teachers and the counselors are conducting the test in order to understand the learning disabilities, emotional disorders or any developmental delays related to any aspects of the individual. That becomes very clear, because early identification is basically very important in making early interventions. If early interventions are made, then students will resolve many of their problems automatically, and there will not be any need of the guidance and counseling in a very comprehensive manner. And certainly the simple guidance will be enough for the students to carry on their academic journey and achieve the target of their employment in future also, and learning the skills needed to get their better adjustment in the society. Personalized intervention is based on the characteristic features also, in regard to the counseling strategies, in regard to the educational guidance and career guidance. Progress monitoring is another aspect which can be achieved by the psychological testing. Baseline testing, for example, pre-intervention compared to follow-up measures, efficacy of support system. For example, you have taken the criteria in the beginning and you are making interventions, and again you are evaluating the performance by using the psychological test. This provides an opportunity to the guidance worker and the teachers to understand the progress, and he or she can monitor the progress of the student. So this provides feedback for improvement of the program and support system. If we know that the progress is satisfactory, then we can carry on the program forward. If we analyze that there are certain issues and certain problems encountered by the student in implementation of this program, definitely we have to change the strategies as per the need of the situation. Academic and career guidance is also heavily depending on the psychological testing results. So aptitude test and personality test match students with suitable career paths and academic streams. Aptitude is basically raw material. Personality characteristic features also suit to certain type of job, and aptitude being an inherent capacity gives the opportunity to get success in particular area in which the person is having the aptitude. Take for example, if someone is having the aptitude of the teaching, then he or she should be directed to acquire the teaching profession, so that he will feel more confident and he will be able to do the justice in that profession. So it reduces the dropout because you are satisfied in getting the academic and the career guidance, then you will feel comfortable, and there will be possibility of less possibility of the dropouts and career related stress by aligning education, carriers with capacities. So we can align the carriers with the capacities, and we can also provide guidance. For inclusive education, psychological testing is also very important. These tests helps in establishing criteria for inclusive education and special education. This also helps in choosing a suitable method of intervention on the part of the teachers and counselors. Inclusive education means students having the different abilities and the capabilities are receiving education in the same classroom. Definitely they will face difficulty to adjust and to move on and achieve up to their potentials. There will be difficulty because of the diversity of their talent, because of the diversity of their behavior characteristic feature. So concept of inclusive education can be possible, implementation of it can be possible if we are using the psychological test and developing our teaching strategies and providing counseling and guidance to the student to get better adjustment to the courses, better adjustment to the teaching learning environment, and better adjustment to the evaluation strategies. Now, another need is from resource allocation. If we know what are the characteristic features and the needs of the student, then we can justify funding for special education, counseling staff, and gifted program. If you have the gifted student, you need certain financial support or certain input from the government, then you can justify your need on the basis of these psychological testing. We have to establish better opportunities for the guidance and the counseling, and some resources will be available to provide education to this population, to provide professional development program for the teachers. If some teachers are not trained in your institution, then in service of training program opportunities must be provided to them. Improved self-awareness. By providing feedback to the students, these tests also help in raising awareness about oneself and improve the lifestyle accordingly. If students are aware about their positives and the negatives, then they will feel more comfortable to enter areas where they are comfortable, they can perform better, they feel well adjusted, and they feel happy in doing the task. So, improved self awareness is basically important in making better justification of the work and better productivity. Need of psychological tests can also be analyzed in regard to the legal and ethical compliances. Mandated, recommended by laws, policies for disability identification ensure equitable access to education. Legal and ethical compliances. Okay, if any person is suffering from above than 40% limit, then he or she will be considered under what category? So we can use it for legal purposes and for ethical purposes. Take for example, any mentally retarded person is there, then we cannot expect that mentally retarded person to survive in the normal classroom. For that, we have to provide a special educational program and assistive devices. Now there are characteristics of psychological testing. Psychological tests are under standardized tools measuring specific constructs means capability or ability. Take for example intelligence. Intelligence is a construct, achievement is a construct, personality is a construct. Though a large number of such tools exist, these have some common characteristic features. These are objectivity, validity, reliability, and standardization. In regard to the scoring procedure, objective in regard to the content which have been incorporated in that. Take for example, you are preparing achievement test. It means that all aspects given in that content must be present in that question paper, or questions or items must be related to that. Due recognition to should be given to each and every part of the content. That is called the objectivity of the content. If any test is being conducted and it is given for the 3% to evaluate it or for scoring purposes, then there should not be any deviation in the scoring, or the scoring should be the same by the different person. That is called the objectivity. What is validity? Validity is the extent to which a test accurately measures what it is designed to measure. The purpose of the test for which it is prepared, if it is solving that purpose, it is means it is valid. Take for example, if any test is prepared for achieving the, for knowing the creativity, then it must differentiate between the creative and the non-creative person. So if it is not evaluating the creativity, it means it is not a valid test. So these psychological tests are basically valid tests, and validity ensures that the results and interpretation of the test scores are meaningful and appropriate for their intended purpose. For example, a valid intelligence test should measure the intelligence rather than reasoning. So reliability is another characteristic feature which is very high characteristic features in order to be the test standardized test. So the reliability of a test refers to its consistency and stability in producing the same results when administered repeatedly under similar conditions. If the test is conducted today, it is again conducted after 10 days, and there is no significant difference between the marks obtained by these two groups, then we can say that the test is reliable test. It is giving the consistency in the results. Consistency of scoring is related to the objectivity, and consistency of the result is basically related to the reliability. There is a possibility the test is reliable but may not be the objective. So a reliable test measures a single concept consistently and has a low error of measurement. Quantifiable results. Okay, the results can be quantifiable. Quantifiable results are accomplished that can be expressed with specific measurable data such as numbers, percentages. They turn abstract duties into tangible proof of your skills and impact, making your achievements more credible and impressive to a potential employer. Because what we are evaluating the performance of the students on any particular construct and converting the score into a quantifiable number. And these quantified numbers can be numerical, percentiles, stenines, and scaled scores. Okay, there is no significant difference between the intelligence of males and the females. It is possible only if we are converting the scores into a quantifiable results. Standardization. A test is standardized, meaning it has uniform items, administration procedure, and scoring procedure. Standardization enables comparisons between the different samples and individuals. It gives confidence to the counselor that results can be relied and plans are made based on the results. Standardized. That is why it is said that the researchers and the guidance and counselors should rely on standardized tests, and these psychological tests are generally the standardized tests because their reliability, validity, objectivity and norms are prepared by the constructor of the test, and on the basis of that they can be utilized by anyone for comparative analysis or for analyzing the individual characteristic features of the students. Now, standardization. We have learned about the standardization. Now there are considerations in the testing also. Okay, what aspects we need to consider in regard to the psychological testing? We are going to conduct a psychological test. We have seen the objectivity, reliability, validity, as well as the norms related to that. Another important characteristic feature is the norms. It means what norms must be decided in the beginning. Age norms, percentile norm, standardized norms, different types of the norms are there, and how to categorize the people into 3 categories, 4, 5 categories or 7 categories. There are certain considerations, and number one, we will discuss ethical and social considerations. Informed consent. When we are going to conduct any psychological test, then what precautions or what considerations we need to make. Test takers must be fully informed about the test purpose, procedures, and potential consequences, and have the right to refuse or withdraw. Informed consent. Okay, we are not imposing them the compulsion to enter in the test and conduct the test and participate in the test and and give the marks or attempt all the questions. No, informed consent means that we are giving freedom to the test takers or the respondents or the client if he or she wants to appear in that. At any juncture, he or she has the right to withdraw from that if he or she doesn't feel comfortable in completing that test. That is called the informed consent. We need to explain the purpose. We need to explain them that your confidentiality or privacy will be maintained, and we need to make them aware that this test results will be used only for the research purposes and only for the counseling purposes. That is called confidentiality and privacy. So test results and personal information should be protected from unauthorized access. These are very confidential information related to the IQ level of the student, personality characteristic features of the student, achievements of the student, and many more characteristic features which may be related to the personal aspect, for example, anxiety, stress, frustration. So keeping these information confidential is basically the need of the hours. In ethical and social consideration, another important point is fairness and bias. Tests should be from cultural, gender, or other biases to ensure fairness for all participants. It should be fair for all. Items must be selected in such a manner that the person is coming from different socio-cultural background, gender, or any other diversity. He or she should not feel biases in regard to the items incorporated in that. Professional competency is another aspect which is related to the social and ethical consideration. Only qualified individuals with the necessary training and knowledge should administer and interpret tests to avoid misinterpretations. Qualified professional competency means a professionally trained teacher should himself or herself conduct the test, and they must have certain knowledge or necessary skills or training related to that. If a researcher take, for example, conducting the test, then he has prepared this test, or he or she knows the background knowledge related to that, and he has got some aspect of the training, in other words, say under the supervision of the supervisor. And counselor, being a trained person, is in a position who is supposed to be a professional competent counselor. He or she must be involved in administering the test. Voluntary participation. Participants must not be forced and should be free to withdraw at any time. You cannot compel the student to appear in the test. That is very important, because we are trying to get the real picture of their personality, and that is possible only when free and frank environment is given to them. Technical and practical considerations are also very important. Number one, validity and reliability, environment and security. Ensure validity, ensure test measure what is intended to measure. We have just explained there. Okay, the test must be valid, it should be reliable. Environment and security means the test environment should be suitable and secure to protect the integrity of the test and the test taker both. We have to create an environment of psychological safety and security in the classroom. That is very important. We are having a good rapport with the students and telling them student that this test will be conducted on you, and you have to give free and frank responses. And these information will be considered as confidential. There are other considerations also. Performance metrics. For software, clearly defined matrices like response time, error rates, and resource utilization to measure performance effectively. These are also very important, although they are generally taken care by the researcher as well as the counselor, and they are trained in these aspects. Test strategy, decide on the type of testing, what kind of testing you are going to conduct, performance or security, and create a detailed plan for that, including schedule, resources which you are going to utilize, and the criteria for starting and ending the test. Decide everything in advance. Let us conclude our lecture. There are number of psychological tests for pupil appraisal. These are crucial diagnosis of the needs and difficulties. If these tests are used as per the guidelines suggested in manual and interpreted well by the administrator, these may be highly useful for many purposes, including in guidance and counseling. So these tests, being objective, reliable, valid, and follow certain norms, are very important, and they can be very beneficial in guidance and counseling program. With this, we have completed our lecture. Thanks for your patience listening, and God bless you all.